The kingdom of Riveildia, a land home to many marvels. Beasts, enchantments, and mystical creatures are but a few of the wonders that dwell on these lands, and although these spectacles are indeed amazing, it is the tale that its people unravel that is truly magical. Our story begins in a classroom filled with children, little gifted minds ready to be molded into something great, the future of Riveildia. Or at least that's how I see it. Mr. Hamphyll, their class teacher, isn't too fond of these children, or any children in general. You see, Mr. Hamphyll isn't a people person. He's also not a happy person in general. He yells at them, gives them long assignments, and he knows the best way is to make even the smartest child feel dull. But like all students, Mr. Hamphyll's class only tolerated him for as long as the school bell didn't ring, or in our case, the dusk bell. The dusk bell is kind of like a rooster that crows every morning, except it's not a chicken, it's a bell. A magical bell that chimes every sundown. And luckily for Mr. Hamphyll's class, it just did. Mr. Hamphyll hates the sound of the dusk bell because it usually means his classes are done for the day, and he loses what little control he had over the children. And today was no different. The children go out of control and Mr. Hamphyll yells these exact words. How many times do I have to tell you little twats that I say when the class is over, not that wretched dog spell? But just as one magical item tests the limits of Mr. Hamphyll's patience, another one comes to life in their very classroom. It's a wall clock mounted right above the chalkboard. Its features slowly shift and turns into a makeshift face. I guess you can say it tells time in a literal sense. Now, Mr. Hamphyll, is that any way to talk to your dear students? The clock says. Mr. Hamphyll tries to argue with the wall clock, but it threatens to tell the headmistress. He reluctantly dismisses the class, but not before he gives them a 10-page essay to write, which, for a group of 12-year-olds, is a lot. All the students groan in frustration except for one who raises his hands. Well, if it isn't Mr. Oliver Woods, Mr. Hamphyll says. Knowing the kind of question Oliver usually asks, Mr. Hamphyll clearly shows he isn't looking forward to it. And Oliver kinda proves him right. He asks what kind of pages are required, and Mr. Hamphyll makes it clear that if it's any smaller than his book, he expects a 20-page essay, and then finally dismisses the class. The day has ended and all the students are off to their respective homes. Oliver stays behind on the school grounds along with his two friends, Amice and Thomas. Thomas is a smart yet timid one. He tends to play things safe. A bit too safe. He's a nerd. Amice, on the other hand, is a lot less careful. She throws caution to the wind and crosses lines even Oliver and Thomas wouldn't dream to. And that's saying a lot, seeing as Oliver is a mischievous type. Amice complains about the assignment, and Thomas tries to hush her down. Who knows what will happen if Mr. Hamphyll hears you, he says, frightened. Amice teases him for being a scaredy cat, but Oliver interjects, accusing her of being one also, for making him ask her a question. Even Amice is scared of Mr. Hamphyll. Oliver says he's not going to ask any more bizarre questions, and Amice tries to convince him otherwise. She tells him it's not that big of a deal, but Oliver still refuses, saying he doesn't want to rile Mr. Hamphyll anymore. This makes Thomas question why their teacher is always angry. Oliver suggests he just hates children, but Thomas refuses to believe that's just it. Just then, Mr. Hamphyll marches into view, angry as always. He yells at them, sending them off from the school premises. Go home, you brats. I've had to deal with enough pesky parents in my lifetime, he says. You were saying? Amice asks with a smirk. The three head on home, enjoying the scenery of nighttime in Riveildia. Oliver complains about not having enough time to hex his neighbor's cats. Now I know you're wondering who'd want to hex a cat. Well, this cat in particular happens to be a snitch. You see, a while back, Oliver had a box of explosive berries which he wasn't meant to have, and the cat told his neighbor, Miss Beatrice, who can talk to cats, who then told his mom. Amice offers to hex the cat for him, but Thomas reminds her that she also has an assignment. But she doesn't seem too bothered about it though. Oliver declines her offer, saying he wants the pleasure of hexing the cats himself. Well, if you say so, Ollie, Amice says. I've told you not to call me that, Oliver replies. The next day arrives and all the students have come with their essays, and to Thomas's surprise, Amice's essay turns out really well. He asks how she was able to write up something so good in such little time, and all she says is, I have my secrets, with a smile on her face. The whole class turn in their essays and Mr. Hamphyll soon starts to examine them. Oliver and his friends feel pretty confident about their work and believe they are off to start a good day. but Mr. Hamphyll had other ideas. Since you've all researched the life cycle of a blue pixie so well, I'd like to hear what you've learned straight from your mouths, Mr. Hamphyll says to the class. Everyone protests as much as they can, but like all teachers, his say is final. Thomas asks when the oral lesson is due, and with a devious smirk, Mr. Hamphyll says, right now. It was a bloodbath. Like Oliver, a lot of the students cannot recall half of what they have written down. But even if they do, Mr. Hamphyll had the cruel idea to question each student on their work. As it gets, a lot of them did awfully, but some better than others. Thomas, for instance, was able to recall a good part of his essay and was able to answer some of the questions Mr. Hamphyll threw at him. Amice was not so lucky. Because Mr. Hamphyll considered her assignment the best, he held no questions back during her presentation. Unable to answer his questions, Mr. Hamphyll begins accusing her of stealing someone's work. His accusations and ridicule soon get to Amice, and she begins to cry in front of the whole class. Now, Amice isn't the toughest person around, but she's definitely not the type to fall apart in public like that. It's been almost an hour past the dusk bell, and the dreadful experience still haunts the three friends, especially Amice. They all sit by their favorite cherry tree in painful silence, which is no wonder since Amice, the life of the group, isn't in the best mood. Her mood soon turns sour as she begins complaining furiously about Mr. Hamphyll. Both Oliver and Thomas try to calm her down, but all they can do is stop her from talking. The three decide to head on home earlier than usual. They barely leave the gates when Oliver realizes he's left his book behind, and not just any book, his book of adventures. Oliver likes to journal his adventures in a book after each one is done. Being one of the most mischievous persons in Riveildian, the book would be nothing but concrete evidence of all his plights of mischief and even future plans in the hands of an adult like, let's say, Mr. Hamphyll. And with the things Oliver and his friends do, well, let's just say they're smart kids, but not the most innocent. Oliver hurries back to the class to search under his desk for his book. He fears Mr. Hamphyll may have already discovered it as he feels nothing under his desk. Oliver, you're searching the wrong desk, a strange voice said. It was the talking clock from the day before. Oliver hurries over to his own desk and quickly finds his book. He thanks the clock for helping him, but the clock in turn apologizes for the way Mr. Hamphyll treated Amice earlier that day. It tells him that it has had a long talk with their teacher and assures him it won't happen again. But something still weighs on Oliver's mind. Like Thomas, he asks the clock if Mr. Hamphyll was always like that, if he's just a bitter man. But while the clock lets Oliver know that Mr. Hamphyll was always rather moody, it tells him that there might be a reason why he's so nasty. A long time ago, when Mr. Hamphyll had just begun teaching here, there was one person who he was very fond of, the clock says. Oliver asks who it is and the clock just says Hamphyll. It takes a moment for Oliver to understand that the clock referred to a brother that Mr. Hamphyll once had. The clock explains that if there was a time Mr. Hamphyll was ever happy, it would be when his older brother, Gregor Hamphyll, was around. Oliver asks what happened to Gregor and the clock says, "Oh, Oliver, even I don't know. One day he just went missing." Hours later, Oliver is still thinking about what the clock had told him. He wonders exactly what his teacher's brother was like. He wonders if he was anything like the Mr. Hamphyll he knows. But most of all, he wonders how he went missing. 2 days have passed and it seems the clock was right about reprimanding Mr. Hamphyll. Though the class still obviously irritates him, he controls himself from lashing out at any students. Well, for most of the class, that is. Oliver gets the sense that Mr. Hamphyll had no choice but to keep his calm, and decides he'd test just how far Mr. Hamphyll could keep this new behavior. He interrupts his teacher and mocks him with every form of wisecrack he could give subtly. Seeing as Oliver is an expert in riling his dear teacher, it's not long before Mr. Hamphyll just loses it and spits out every insult he can think of. He goes so out of control that they have to be dismissed by the talking clock early under the claim that their teacher wasn't feeling well. A mission accomplished for little Oliver. The three meet up at their cherry tree as usual. Thomas doesn't care much for Oliver's stunts. He says he had come to like the new Mr. Hamphyll, but Amice is just utterly amused. She assures Thomas that Mr. Hamphyll can't change who he is and was sure to snap sooner or later. It's like Ollie said, he's just a bitter old man. There's no way he'd change who he naturally is. Amice says. But just then, Oliver remembers his conversation with the talking clock. He tells them about the clock apologizing for what happened to Amice and why Mr. Hamphyll acted how he did today. He also tells them about Mr. Hamphyll's missing brother and that he believes that to be the reason for his brother's nasty attitude. Another Mr. Hamphyll, Amice says not too pleased with the idea. Oliver explains that if they want more answers, they would have to ask the person in charge of the school, which in itself is a problem. You see, the headmistress of the Riveildian Institute stays in the senior division of the school, which is an entirely different place from when Oliver and his friends school. Amice tells Oliver it would be impossible to meet up with their headmistress soon, but Oliver assures her, saying he has a plan. It's the beginning of a weekend. Oliver and his friends make their way to their favorite potions vendor, Old Man Jake. Amice knocks on the door of his stall and says, "Good morning, Jake." "Hey kids, what sort of trouble are you looking for today?" Old Man Jake says. "Adventures," Oliver corrects. Old Man Jake is known for selling hexes and spells to non-magical people who can't make their own. So it's no wonder Oliver and his friends know him so well. Oliver asks if Old Man Jake had something that would disguise their appearance, and he presents them with a small potion and a hand mirror. After some haggling from Amice, the three set off with the potion and mirror with them. Oliver hands the potion over to Thomas to see if he can figure out how to work it. Thomas explains that the potion turns the person who drinks it to whoever is reflected in the mirror. He shows them the mirror, which reflects nothing but the vast blue sky. Thomas tells them that the mirror would only reflect once a spell is cast. When Oliver asks what spell that is, Thomas says he doesn't know. "I'm sure we can find something in the school library," he says. Oliver says it's alright since they plan to use it on a school day even. Thomas doesn't like the idea of missing class like many times before just because of Oliver's schemes, but Amice tries to persuade him by saying they are doing this for Mr. Hamphyll. All Oliver says is that he has a plan for that too. It's the middle of a long study session in Mr. Hamphyll's class. Oliver had cleverly switched Thomas's book with a book on potions and enchantments he'd found in the library. Once Thomas signals that he's found what they need, Oliver asks Mr. Hamphyll if he could use the toilet, and Mr. Hamphyll reluctantly agrees. On his way out, he secretly drops a handful of small origami bats on a girl's table. The girl gathers the paper into a drawn circle and casts a spell on them. The bats come to life in normal size and then begins flying around the class, causing a huge panic. Mr. Hamphyll tells everyone to calm down and pulls out a small wand. He casts a spell on them, but they only react by growing larger. Mr. Hamphyll rushes the entire class out of the classroom while he stays behind to deal with the bats. As the class runs through the hallways, Amice stops Thomas, letting the others leave without them. She explains that this is probably part of Oliver's plan and that they should try and find him. She initially suggests that they take the back exit of the school where he most likely passed through, but Oliver comes into view almost immediately, saying he just waited for them here. As the three take the back exit of the school, Amice expresses a concern for Mr. Hamphyll, but Oliver assures her that they aren't real bats. He tells her that they are made of paper and will disappear once they make contact with any water. He also tells them that a curse was put on them that would make them grow larger every time a spell was cast on them. Amice finds it hard to believe that Oliver would pull off that kind of magic. She asks how he did it and he tells them that he had help from his friend, Luciana. The two are terrified. What you need to know about Luciana is that she is absolutely feared among her classmates. She has more rumors about her than anyone else in the entire school. Why is she so feared? More on that later. Oliver tells the both of them that they have nothing to worry about. He says she's not like they think and that she's nice even. The both of them are still unconvinced, but Amice decides that they should at least thank her. Luciana seemingly shows out of nowhere right behind them. Amice and Thomas try their best to be friendly but are too frightened by her demeanor. They manage to thank her for her help and the three head out of the school premises. They arrive at the gates of the Riveildian Senior Institute where they wait to choose whoever's appearance they'll mimic. After a while, three students emerge from the gates carrying a large box. They follow them to a place called the Potions Parlor. A potions parlor is like a small brewery for magic potions, a place Thomas is especially fond of even though he and his friends aren't allowed in because they are too young. The three sneak into the place and hide behind one of the many cauldrons they find. Oliver whips out the transformation potion and mirror. Following Thomas's instruction, he casts a spell that makes the mirror reflect and captures the reflection of one of the seniors. He pours the potion on the mirror and drinks from it, transforming himself into a perfect copy of the senior. He repeats the process and hands the mirror to Thomas to drink from it, but Thomas turns into the girl amongst the seniors. He complains about the prank while Amice does all she can to stifle her laughter. She then explains that she and Oliver decided that she'd stay behind and make sure the other students don't leave this place. And as soon as Oliver and Thomas leave, she gets to work. Amice locks the doors of the potions parlor. She then makes a huge mess of the potion, creating a dense fog that blinds everyone right before she escapes through a window. Meanwhile, Oliver and Thomas make their way through the school in their new bodies. They meet with another student and ask where they could find the headmistress of the school. But the student looks at them suspiciously and says, "It's odd that a school prefect will need direction to the headmistress's office." Thomas makes a quick save, saying that they were just trying to settle an argument on whether she'd move to a newer office. The student buys their lie and tells them where the office is. They both arrive at the headmistress's office, where shortly after they were met by Professor Adeline, the school's headmistress. She welcomes them and asks if she could help them. Oliver then asks who Gregor Hamphyll was. At first, Professor Adeline says she's surprised that they knew of someone who went missing before they were even born. However, she tells them, Professor Hamphyll was an alchemist. His disappearance was a mystery to all of us, even his younger brother. During his last few days here, he was deep in his research on immortality. A day before he went missing, he claimed that he found the answer. He was so excited about it, he rushed out of the school saying he had to share this moment with his brother. Oliver and Thomas wait expectantly for what more she has to say, but she tells them that that's all. She says Mr. Hamphyll claimed never to see his brother that day. If I had to guess, the experiment went wrong and he paid a hefty price, she says. Oliver asks if Professor Adeline knows what kind of experiment it was, and she tells them that it was one purely of his own invention, making the case all the more difficult. She, however, tells them a record of his personal notes and turned over to a page showing the requirements for the experiment. Oliver studies it for a while and notices something is off about it. He says it's not like a regular experiment, and Professor Adeline explains that Gregor thought the answer to immortality was in both magic and alchemy. She explains that Gregor aimed to bind his soul to an unlimited life source with the experiment, which made sense, but something far scarier struck Oliver. Professor Adeline had addressed him with his real name and not the name of the person he looked like. Oliver asks how Professor Adeline had seen through their disguises, and she tells them that she sees in more ways than one. At that moment, something dawns upon Oliver. A glint shines in his blue eyes as the answer comes to him. He tells Professor Adeline that he thinks he knows where Gregor might be. She tells him he would have to hurry back because his spell seemed to be wearing off. But right before they leave, Oliver asks how she knew they were disguised. She tells him she has a magical ability, so he asks that she follows them. Meanwhile, back in the potions parlor, the seniors finally escape and Amice takes off before they can see her, hoping that she bought enough time for her friends. She heads to the school gates where she sees Oliver and Thomas back in their normal bodies, accompanied by an unknown girl. They quickly spot her and ask her to follow them as they run back to their school. They arrive and meet an enraged Mr. Hamphyll standing in the middle of the school grounds. The grass is damp, so they know he'd figured out how to stop the fake paths. He begins an onslaught of harsh insults at the three students before finally threatening to expel them from the school for their stunts. But before he can go even further, the girl they came with turns into Professor Adeline right before everyone's eyes. She goes on to tell him that he couldn't be more wrong about the children, and then warns him not to insult them ever again. She turns to Oliver and he points at the tree where he and his friends usually are and says he believes that's where Gregor is. He explains that since the experiment wasn't normal from the start and its aim was to bind him to a lengthy life source, then it's very possible that he was bound to a tree on his way to meet his brother in both body and soul. Those weren't his exact words, but he figured it out nonetheless. Mr. Hamphyll shows his disbelief and demands for proof, but Professor Adeline confirms Oliver's claim, saying she can see him. She orders for everyone to go into the school building except for Mr. Hamphyll. The children all watch from the class window as Professor Adeline summons her staff from nothing and puts on a powerful display of magic. When it's all done, Gregor is separated from the tree and is human again. The children all exclaim as they see the sour Mr. Hamphyll embrace his brother with joy. Oliver, Amice, and Thomas come out to meet Gregor, and he greets them with much joy. He tells them that he enjoyed listening to their plans of mischief in the years he was stuck in as a tree. He then praises them for their commitment and cleverness in saving him. And to everyone's surprise, Mr. Hamphyll steps forward to thank them also. Don't get me wrong, he still acted very coldly to them, even now. He asks them what each of them aspire to be. I want to become a knight, Oliver says. I want to become a renowned mage, Thomas says. I just want to have fun, Amice says. Mr. Hamphyll says then that since she was able to write that essay, then he has no doubt that she'll turn out just fine. That's as much as an apology as it gets from him. As celebration for Gregor's return, school was cancelled for the rest of the day. The three friends make their way home. With a mischievous grin, Amice collects the mirror and what's left of their potion and runs off with Thomas. Oliver takes a seat, pulls out his book of adventures, and starts scribbling. Well, that was the first Riveildian tale. Of course, this was just a summary of what the story is. If you are interested in reading the source, then you can head over to my profile on Wattpad and Inkit, where I post all my stories. And if you like this video, then like, share, and subscribe or follow to stay tuned for my next video where I talk about Luciana's secrets.